Welcome to the Harpswell SelectBoard meeting workshop regarding financing options. If you want to participate by Zoom, the meeting ID is 819-0791-9659, and the passcode is 592297. All right, take it away, Terry.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce, David, can you hear me okay?
Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, he
Yes,
is.
I can hear you.
So I'd like to introduce David Eisenthal from Unibank Fiscal Advisory Services. And deja vu for David. He did this financial analysis for us when we borrowed $3.5 million to remove the pier at Mitchell Field. And so we're just kind of following that same process to see what our options are. And David will go through his report, and he'll tell you there's even other options too, but he's really provided some good information here that he'll review. No decision is being looked for tonight. It's really to ask your questions and understand this report, and then a decision will be likely in 2 weeks if you have enough information to do so. So welcome, David, and take it away if you'd like to introduce your colleagues as well.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman, we've got Ben Oglesby and Alex Kaufman, also from Unibank Fiscal Advisory Services. They work with me on.
Any idea why? Oh,
But Mr. Chairman just said Ben's going to get a headache being upside down.
I'm sorry, I couldn't restrain myself from laughing. Yeah, that's a little odd. So anyway, through you, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll just go ahead and briefly summarize where we see things. The town engaged us to prepare a financing analysis for the emergency services building, which was approved by the voters in June, and also the boat launch capital project, which we understand is coming up very soon. And we looked at bond issuance of general obligation bonds, similar to what the town did in 2018 for Mitchell Field. And then we looked at borrowing through the Maine Municipal Bond Bank. We started out by looking at project cash flows. And if you look at the report that we provided, the first part of the appendix, roughly pages A1 to A7, show the project cash flows under different assumptions for either bond issuance or borrowing through the bond bank. We then developed financing plans. In general, we were thinking that you're going to want to issue bond anticipation notes, reaching out to in-state banks this fall to get the initial cash for both the emergency services building and the boat launch. We're thinking about $1,275,000 between September, October timeframe. We would be looking at a much larger short-term issue in the spring of 2026, and then a permanent financing, whether through the bond bank or through an issuance of GO bonds, general obligation bonds, in the spring of 2027. We made some assumptions as far as borrowing rates and yields and cost of issuance. We compared the town's bond issue from 2018 to what the market conditions were then, and then kind of applied those to the current day. And we determined made an estimate of what cost of issuance would be, and we did something similar with the bond bank issue. And what we came up with is that if you held everything absolutely equal, general obligation bond issuance would be slightly less costly than a bond bank financing, and that's including all of the costs of issuance. And that's based on the town's very strong credit rating. Now, what we would point out is that in all likelihood, it's not likely that the town, if it chose to do general obligation bonds, it's not likely that the town would be choosing to issue bonds on the same day that the bond bank prices. So you're not going to be coming to market necessarily in the same market. And markets change constantly. They go up, they go down, and The difference could widen or narrow or even switch, where the bond bank could assume the advantage. So we would focus on instead on other considerations, operating cash flow. If the town issues general obligation bonds, you could do what you did for the Mitchell Field bonds, which is to set the payments at interest June 15th, December 15th, with principal due December 15th. The bond bank, you can pay any time of the year as long as it's May 1 and November 1. Uh, Bond rating, you may see a value in maintaining a bond rating. I'm not sure how strong a value you would place on that, but that could be seen as a value. Continuing disclosure. We've had some conversations, Terry and Christy, and we have had some conversations about the implications of a general obligation bond issue for continuing disclosure requirements. And we're going to have to, I think we're going to, in the next week or so, we're planning to reach out to Greg M., who is bond counsel to the town, to go over some of these issues. But I think the basic issue is that when you reach a certain amount of outstanding indebtedness, generally $10 million, the obligation to provide ongoing disclosure intensifies. Basically, it's possible that the town would need to update its disclosure documents, such as the one it prepared in 2018. It would have to update that every year that bonds were outstanding. And we're quite sensitive to staffing capacity and also the cost of providing that service. Now, the continuing disclosure might not be as much of an issue if the town is planning significant additional financings, depending on how much and when and for what purposes. It may be that the continuing disclosure would become more of a moot point. So, and that's something that we could talk about as time goes on. So, a final comment is that financing plans can and will change based on changes in cash flows. The plans we have in here are based on the cash flows. Port City Architecture provided a cash flow for the emergency services building, and we put together a cash flow based on conversations with Terry and Christy. And I think it would be for example, it would be reasonable to look at possibly splitting the financing of the two projects, where you could do the boat launch. You could do that through the bond bank in the spring of 26. You could hold off on a decision to do the emergency services building, do that either through the bond bank or a bond issuance in either 26 or 27. If for some reason the cash flow accelerates, maybe you'd want to finance this permanently sooner. So that's a broad overview of the report we gave. I guess through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board members or Terry or Christy may have.
What was the thought process in splitting the two projects? Where were you two at as far as between the emergency building and the
You mean, should we combine it as one borrowing or have
or
two separate?
two separate?
I don't know that we've reached a final decision on that.
Like David said, it depends on really, now that it's gone out to bid, David, that project has gone out to bid and bids are due the end of August. So in theory, they could be starting this spring, but that's why David's,
This fall, actually.
excuse me,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, I meant to say fall.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're still on vacation.
I'm on vacation head, but anyways, that's why he had recommended in that first ban, the most of those funds were for the boat launch project, and some based on the Port City Architect cash flow for the emergency services building. So I think as David said, we've got an option to pull it off. We'll need to do a bond anticipation note financing regardless for the boat launch. Because probably, when David and I spoke earlier, it probably does make sense to go out for the boat launch with the spring issuing for Maine Municipal Bond Bank. And so one of my biggest questions that I had for David earlier, which ties together here, is, on page 7, those are the additional considerations that David reviewed between the bond rating, the payments. The payment terms, there's not a lot of pros or con difference between the two of those, because our taxes start in September. We have a short-term borrowing in May, and so a interest payment in May or June, not that big of a difference. Principal payment between November or December, which we would structure it to be December if we issued our own bonds like we did for the pier. But again, tax funding has come in, and November's okay for that as well. So we don't put a lot of weight in that one. While it's good to consider, because those dates are close together, that's not that big of a consideration. And the bond rating, you could consider that. We currently are with Standard & Poor's a AAA, which is their highest ranking. But as David points out too, if our population were to fall by 32 people, we're subject to all new rating standards with Standard & Poor's.
Right.
Really?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to address Terry's point on that?
Please.
So yeah, Standard & Poor's, S&P Global Ratings, released new rating criteria. The rating that the town got in 2018 was based on criteria that they released in 2013. They updated their criteria in September of 2024, and one of the since this is a public meeting, I'll be careful in my language, but I will say it's annoying that they now will just, based on population, if an issuer is less than 5,000 people, that's an automatic mark-off. It doesn't mean that the town will get downgraded necessarily. In fact, the fact that the town has not gotten downgraded probably that may not mean that there's any fear of a downgrade happening because of a bond issuance. Actually, the S&P, in the wake of the new criteria, reached out to a number of issuers that are small communities and downgraded them, just not related to a bond issue. So that's not that, if you haven't heard from S&P, then you may be in good shape, but that's something that we would want to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting you say that, David, because initially with Moody's, we were AA1, and then they reached out to us, and we went through a review and was upgraded to, we were AA2, and we were upgraded to AA1. But we've not heard from Standard & Poor's, so as you said, perhaps that's a good sign.
Right.
What was your question, Mr. Chairman?
No, he answered it. I was curious about the population index. Our population's growing, it's not shrinking.
Certainly think so, but it all, census,
A lot of seasonal
there's
property owners.
a lot of seasonal property owners, and if not all the people are accounted for in the census, that's the number that's used. And so however accurate or not accurate it is.
Yeah.
And
Is
so-
that only examined every year the census is done, or is that examined when we issue the bond, the actual population?
Is it always just tied on the rating
Well,
companies? Do they just tie it to census?
So every 10 years?
It would be, they would, so the rating agencies, both of them, will look at this when, if you apply to, one or both of the rating agencies, they will look at all of these metrics when the town issues bonds. But both of them, the rating agencies, also perform surveillance on the ratings to, especially if you have issuers like yourselves that you've last issued bonds 7 years ago, to make sure that the rating stays fresh, so to speak. they'll do surveillance. So they would look at the population metrics and all of the other metrics at the time of the surveillance review.
Which US Census does update outside of a regular 10-year cycle.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
right.
One thing I want to point out, and just something to keep in mind, the way that the bond bank operates, a lot of the security for their bonds comes from the fact that they finance a reserve fund. They basically borrow an amount of money that's available in case the borrowers don't make their payments. The high rating of the bond bank is based in part on this reserve fund. But what they do is that if rates are like they are now, the short-term rates, the investment rates are relatively high at this point. So we would expect that the investment of the proceeds that finance the reserve fund the return on that investment would be enough to cover the debt service on that portion of the issue. However, if you have rates like you had in 2020 or 2021, where the investment rates were really, really low, there would be something called negative arbitrage, where the investment return on the reserve fund would be a lot less than the cost of borrowing. And that could get passed on. And I think it does, in conditions like that, the bond bank has in the past passed on those costs to borrowers. So if conditions changed dramatically by the time you borrow, and I'm not saying, we're seeing some reduction in short-term rates, but I don't think we're seeing anything like what we saw 4 and 5 years ago. But I think that we'd want to, if you retain us as your municipal advisor, we would want to keep track of that for you.
So that's a really good point, too. The other points that David had made on page 7, so our population is one thing for ratings. If you're looking at a pro-con list, the continuing disclosure, David had said we need to really speak with our own town attorney, because when I called him earlier, the outstanding bond indebtedness that he mentions there is just the 18 pier and this potential new borrowing, and the main bond bank borrowings aren't included in that. So the point I'm making is we need to have the conversation with the town attorney to verify that, and also the status of the bond anticipation notes, because if we're going to be over 10 million anyways, then that's a determining factor too on which way we may go. There is, as David mentioned, a lot more work. If we have to update that report that we did in 18, that Christy, Marguerite, myself, and our financial advisor at that time, and Chairman Rick Daniel at the time, spent a lot of time on that report. And so that's a lot of work. When you're talking about under a $50,000 difference, it was much more significant when we did this review in 2018. And Marguerite at the time had come to the board and said, staff has discussed it, and that it's a large difference, a large savings to taxpayers. And so it was clear to go out and issue our own bonds at that time. And staff was willing to do that work for that savings. And there's other factors at this time to take into consideration. So we really wanted to have David here this evening to present his report, but we do need to get that resolved with our bond counsel, Greg M. Because that would be impactful to your decision.
Next time.
And I thought there might be one more thing.
I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead, David. I was looking for one more thing I thought I wanted to point out.
Well, I would say there's a lot of very kind of obscure securities law that could be involved, and we'd have to review the facts with Greg so that he could make a determination on how the law would be applied in the particular case, so that, and the impact of effectively being over $10 million, I think you'd be looking at some impact in terms of either the time and effort of existing staff, or you'd have to consider expanding staffing capacity, and I'm not sure what the appetite is for that. I mean, if you foresaw, as members of the select board, if you foresaw that the town was going to be growing and might need to make those sorts of enhancements to staff capacity, that might be less of an issue. But if you don't see this growth requiring that kind of expansion, then that might be something you'd really want to look at carefully.
I think it'll be important to get that, that opinion or that advice from Greg M. on this continuing disclosure issue, because that may impact where we land. So that's going to be an important piece of information.
What would be the timeline with Greg?
I think he's been on vacation, so I think he's due back this coming week
No, okay.
or next
We
week.
can reach out and we can try. I would suggest that we, Terry, Christy, Ben, Alex, and I try to set up a time to talk to Greg maybe late next week to review these issues.
Sounds good.
At this time, do you have any further questions, though? Staff will continue to work with David, and we will be formulating our recommendation for your consideration.
Yeah. Like 7 years ago, takes time to wrap your head around.
That it does.
Lots of variables here.
Lots of variables.
And it all come together.
Yep,
Yeah.
it does.
Well, thank you for engaging us. We enjoyed working with you 7 years ago, and we're enjoying working with you again. And whatever we can do for you, we'd be very happy to do that. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good evening.
You
Thanks.
too.
We'll be in touch.
Bye-bye now.
Right. We'll end the workshop right now, and we'll continue in 35 minutes.